And good evening and welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And it is the 4th of the 3rd, 2020. Just gone 9 o'clock here in Ireland and GMT, of course, wherever you are in the world. Hope you're having a great day. I have got an absolutely packed show for you tonight. So I have, in the first part of the show, I'll be playing a pre-recorded interview with Ken Scott. This is his third appearance on Out of the Bag, and it will be monthly throughout the year until we get his massively important information out to you guys and get sharing and maybe even start a revolution. Listen to the information that Ken Scott gives and you'll realise that it is revolutionary, although it's also historical and really interesting stuff. Check out www.panterrapca.org and www.gemstoneuniversity.org. Really insightful interview. I know that you're going to enjoy it, so that's going to take up the first part of the show. Without further ado, I don't think I should waste any more time. I will get on with Ken Scott interview, and this is part 3, and we will have once a month from now on, maybe to the end of the year, with more from Ken Scott. Here's this episode. And welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And this is another pre-recorded interview. It is the 2nd of the 3rd, 2020. It'll be going out on my show on the 4th of March. And I'm so thrilled to have back for his third, I said it was a series of 3 already, the trilogy. There'll be more, so there will. I'm really thrilled to invite back onto Out of the Bag, Mr. Ken Scott. Ken, are you with me?
Yes. Hi, Sean. How are you?
Do you know what? I shouldn't have said Mr., should I really?
Definitely not. But that's okay. And when you use Scott, usually I refer to or use the name Kenneth Scott. That's my given first and middle name, and most people call me Ken. Any variations, but definitely not Mr., because that is a title. We don't want titles.
Indeed it is. And I just want to tell my listeners, if they listen for the first time, to listen back for Ken's earlier interviews on www.outofthebagradio.weebly.com. Just go into the Google search there, put Ken Scott into the Google search, and you'll get the earlier interviews. And of course, we're talking to the man who is behind the Panterra Private Contract Association and the Gemstone University. And for those that have been listening for the last few shows, we left it hanging in the air in our previous show. Ken, we were talking about equity, or rather we didn't end up talking about equity. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about a lot of things, and what we talk about is interwoven with issues in context of law. And most people think law is just one integrated whole system, and they just say, well, it's against the law, or the law says this or that. But the structure of law is very multifaceted, and really what's very important for people to understand who they are and where they are if they desire to be free and they desire to live in a free reality. And we won't say a free world, because it's going to be a long time before we actually have a wholly free world, but we can change our status and have standing within the context of the fullness of what law is jurisdictionally, that we can be free. There have been works, documents, articles, books written with various variations on the title, Living Free in an Unfree World. So how do we do that? Well, you have to understand where you are and who you are and how to get to where you want to be, which over many years I've used the metaphor when I talk about this subject. I was born and grew up in California. I still live in California. I spent a number of years moving around different states and ended up back in Southern California. So in Southern California, one of the famous local cities and known around the world is Santa Monica. It's on the ocean. It's on the beach. Okay. And there's a pier there. It's a famous pier. And people, if you're aware of California at all, saying something about Santa Monica Pier is pretty well a given. People know that. So that being said, there's a pier, and it extends going in the direction. If you walk from the from the beach out to the end of the pier, you're walking west. And what I say to people is, okay, you want to go to New York and you walk west on the pier. If you think you're going to continue walking and get to where you want to be, and you continue going west on that pier, you're going to end up in the opposite of where you want to be. So you need to know where you are, where you're standing, where you're facing, and where your goal or objective in your journey is. So if you want to get to New York and you're standing on the edge of the pier facing west and you take a few more steps, you are going to fall into the water and you're going to be hit by the waves and bashed into the barnacle encrusted piers, and you're going to be ripped up. And most people who pursue freedom, who don't understand the nature of law and the different layers or jurisdictions of law, take a long journey over a short pier, and they end up being bashed and beat up and shredded by the sharp edges of the system, and they don't know why. A lot of people have educated themselves to an advanced level, and still that happens to them. Yeah. So understanding jurisdiction is paramount to understanding where you are and how to go to where you want to be. And there's quite a number of jurisdictional dimensions of law. They all have different names: canon law, kingdom law, ecclesiastical law, commercial law, civil law, admiralty, maritime, equity. They all have their different rules. And you can go into a courtroom, and the court is not the room. It's not the building. So if I walk into a court and I don't know where I'm standing, and standing has to do with an internal understanding, or people don't like to use the word under because that comes from Babylonian systems where you stood under the god who dictated the rules. And so people don't use the word understand. They like to say understanding, but people understand what the word understanding means. It means to comprehend, to really know something. But true knowledge is an integration where you really integrate and you truly know who you are and where you are standing, and or where you want to be standing and how to get there. So a court is not a room or a building. You can walk into a room, and if you don't understand the nature of the game and the jurisdiction you're in, they control it across the board, the way the system is set up. Because law is present in that room. Equity is present in that room. Civil code and procedure, which is derived from admiralty maritime, with a subsection of bankruptcy rules and procedures, that's in that room too. Martial rule and martial law are in that room. So people think that there's a magic door somewhere. You have to go and find it and open it, and you get equity and or other elements of what you want relative to basically settling issues, settling accounts, which we can get into because that's a key part of all of this discussion. Right. So back to equity. What is equity? Well, you can define equity, or equity is defined in law books as balance, equanimity, equality, settling of accounts where balance and equitable interest or beneficial rights are honored and properly distributed according to who holds the equitable interests and beneficial rights, which I'll get into in a moment. But basically, for me, on a universal level, equity is simply balance. It's the if we start from the fundamental that we live and exist in this current body and form in a universe that's founded on a priori universal law or principle, which is sovereign free will, that we all have sovereign free will. We are endowed with it. If we are in this universe, in this solar system, planetary body, it's hardwired. And that is a starting point. And if you understand that and you don't argue with the way the world system is, and you understand that the so-called dominating, controlling cabal, or whatever you want to call it, understands this, and they have constructed the entire world system based on that, which equates to, or comes to the point that everything in our current relationship to the system, the control mechanisms, the taxation, everything else, is because we have voluntarily acquiesced to the system. We have consented by contract to enter into that relationship and be bound by all the rules that are inherent.
Sorry to cut across you there. Have we done that? I mean, we were lied to. We didn't sign our birth certificate.
Well, that's a perfect question, but hold on to that. Let's get to more into the depth of equity.
Okay.
Okay. So,
get you back on the equity and balance and equality.
Yeah. So, so I'm laying the framework. I'm laying the principles that we exist in, and that a priori principle is sovereign free will. And where we are going back to, for those who choose that, to remove themselves from the cult of death, the realm of death, and the rules that adhere to one when they voluntarily acquiesce or consent to being in that realm. Where we're going back to is the purity, if you will, the wholeness of standing in your full sovereign integrity. So in the law movement, the patriot movement, there are all the different names, sovereignty movement that started really in the United States and went around the world with a whole lot of pieces that are improperly constructed. And it's part in one aspect, it's called the sovereignty movement, and everybody in it, and I've been involved with it since the 90s, virtually 30 years now. They all said, well, the goal is I want to be sovereign. And then the system twisted that and called all those people who are pursuing it, who really don't know what they're doing, even if they have advanced knowledge, they call them sovereign citizens. And,
right, okay.
And that's a little rabbit trail we could return to if we want, but we're staying with the focus of equity. The key is we don't need to be sovereign. The key is we're a bonded surety, meaning we are attached to as a bond servant, as an indentured servant who must work off the indenture relationship of the debt system that we've attached to. And we're that bonded surety being the guarantor of a bankrupt franchise, meaning we're the collateralized debt servicer to the debt in that name that has given us license to operate in a realm called the federal or domestic zone in most countries. Even if you don't per se have a federal government, it's all based on a federalized, centralized system that is called a domestic jurisdiction. And it's commercial in nature. All of those hundreds, at least 150 of those, what we call nations, are corporations. They are all in bankruptcy, and they have been reorganized under a centralized system where the creditor dictates the rules of the bankrupt debtor, and we're operating as a franchise. So hold that thought, and let's go back to equity. What is equity? Well, equity in a universal sense is when one is aligned with themselves as a co-creator or a conduit of creation itself, of source creation, universal principles, and all of that, then we are, everything we do, we create. We're creating something. And as we move forth in a continuum of creation, we're creating value. If I go outside and I trim the grass, in effect, I'm sustaining my life, but I'm interacting with life itself, the life form of the grass, the air, the bugs, the microorganisms, the birds that eat the bugs, etc., and I'm creating value. If I, on a larger scale, go build a bridge across a river or a building or an agricultural farm or anything, I'm creating value. And so equity is the cognizance of value creation within a continuum of creation itself. And what we are dealing with here is a mirror image, an obverse of how equitable value that belongs to who is the creator. And I'm not talking about creator as a god or a divine principle or whatever. I'm just saying in terms of, there's millions, trillions, quadrillions, gazillions of living beings in many forms in this universal field of creation, and that is based on sovereign integrity and sovereign free will. And each being has the capacity to create. But the reverse of what we have agreed to be adhered to as a bonded surety in this bankrupt admiralty civil code procedure system is that everything we create, every time we want to create, we have to go to who? We have to go to the bank and contract, put our signature on a piece of paper, which is an application that bank then takes through the system, through the back door, so to speak, down back to the Treasury, and the Treasury's relationship in the United States to the Federal Reserve, that's going to monetize that request to have issued some monetary form that we call money or currency, so that I can build my house.
Right.
So I bond myself to the debt, and I become the debt servicer, the bonded surety, and all of that. Now, what the bank does, and the Treasury in relationship to the Federal Reserve, and keeping in mind that in the last 100 years, the system has been created that it is a unipolar, meaning singular point of origin of the entire global banking system, and it's all under, essentially up to this point, the Federal Reserve. And there's a history, and I think we've touched on that in the last two discussions. But that's because all of the national entities, which were converted from a country or a governmental identity to a corporation, that then was put into bankruptcy, and all those bankrupt corporations then came into reorganizational relationship with a global system through the UN coming out of World War II, and then the UN to the International Monetary Fund. And so every national corporation was bankrupt. It was under military occupation. The ultimate military occupier was the Federal United States, Inc. Military organization, and by global contract with all these roughly 250 national corporations in bankruptcy, they all agreed to collateralize a continuing issue of monetized debt to their population by putting that population into a containment system called the civil body. And the civil body, or going back to Roman civil law and the original Latin, the civitas, the civil body, is literally and energetically lifted off the land. And so we have no standing on the land. And so when we go to the bank and we create a debt, and they give us their monetized debt instruments, and we spend it and we build the house, most people think of equity as, oh, well, I put $100,000 down and I built this house for $300,000, and now the market's gone up and it's worth $750,000, and I have $250,000 or $300,000 in equity. And that's how people think of as equity.
Yes.
But in fact, what has happened is they've taken that original debt, that loan, it's a 30-year mortgage, and they have packaged it with other debt instruments, other mortgages, and they have done all kinds of things in their global casino trading system that creates off-book money, private trading, and private accrual of profits and proceeds. And because we abandoned our original estate and we abandoned everything that we create, because we created the first instrument to create the mortgage and the money in the first place, but we abandoned it. So in the rules of maritime jurisdiction, which controls the monetary system as it currently is, which is all under domestic, commercial, civil procedure jurisdiction, the rules of maritime law apply. And one of the key rules of maritime law is the rule of salvage and claim of an abandoned vessel and the property or the cargo that was in that vessel. So, somebody or a captain and his crew are on a boat. It's got cargo and everything. The boat gets slammed on the rocks during a storm, and it crashes into the rocks and the beach, and they all either are killed or they walk away and they're abandoned. That boat is sitting there with whatever's on it, and it's abandoned. So the rule is I can claim it. I can claim it and salvage it, and when I do that, it now belongs to me. Nice. So everything we create is abandoned. It goes into an underlying estate that we abandoned right after birth. We never claimed it, and so it basically reverted to the state, and under maritime rules of salvage and claim, they now operate it. And under rules of estate law, they act as the executor who controls the estate, and we're simply the bonded servant or the landless serf lifted off of the landed estate. And everything that we create, all we get is a right of use. We can use the house, but they have it attached. It actually belongs to them in terms of their whole legal title system and so forth. And then everything they do on the backside with the instruments that are created that way are profits and proceeds that belong to the estate. And that accrues and builds equity. But there's balance there, because inherent in every single debt instrument we ever applied our signature to, the settlement component or the offsetting equity against the liability or the debt is built into it. So in actual fact, people think they're in debt, but in actual fact, there is a zero-sum equation or accounting on every single debt that we have. And the offset or the equitable interest that will balance, settle, and close the public debt is there, but we abandoned it. So we have the right to reclaim it. We have the right to walk the steps to change our status and have the standing in law to then compel the equitable interest to be applied, settle, and close our debt. Now, I shifted from discussing this on a universal level to a monetary and a legal level, but they are all mirror reflective. And our ultimate intention here, for those who want to have what I call freedom absolute, which is putting the noun first and the adjective or the modifier or the descriptor second. It's absolute, but it's freedom, which is equivalent to saying I want to stand as a whole being with directive capacity, with my will as a principle that I hold and embody in the sovereign integrity of my being as an eternal being standing here in a physical realm where all contracts, karmic, monetary, and so forth, that do not serve my being, my purpose, intent, and will in this moment, if they do not serve that, then I have the capacity, because it is a free will universe, sovereign free will, and I can rescind and close contracts that do not apply anymore. And that's actually on the universal level what we're doing here in this phase of closing history, closing time. We're resolving our karma. Because the monetary debt is a reflection of a unseen facility, if you will, of karmic debt, but we are the creator of it. We created the karma, we created the separation from our own being and source, and we, in a sovereign free universe, have the capacity to reclaim it, reclaim the abandoned estate, and most importantly, the landed estate of our physical embodiment that we did abandon as well, because like you just mentioned before we started the recording, you're going to present another brief interview to be aired when you air this interview. Yes. About a woman whose baby was taken away. Well, why was that baby taken away? Well, there's an ostensible surface reason, supposedly protect the baby and so forth. But the fact is that the mother does not have any standing. She abandoned her own estate. She has no lawful authority. She only has legal limited use of the estate of the new baby. And if the state, as the executor of the estate and the arbiter of the legal system operating or managing the containment field of the civil body, of all of the human beings that are lifted off the land onto that into that containment system, if they determine in the best for the best the public good, and the public is a very different definition than what most people think. But they've determined in the public good that this mother cannot keep her baby. Yes. And because of her lack of standing and her parents, and going back really hundreds of years, that there's nothing she can do about it. They can come and take the baby away. And there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cases of that happening every year in the United States, probably, for sure in the UK and Ireland and so forth, and probably in most countries.
Yes. It's a money racket, isn't it? It's
a money racket because every single estate that they're operating is creating public debt and private equity. But let me take another step back before we go further with that, and back to what's the most important: universal equity. We are universal beings. We are eternal beings that have co-creative capacity to create value unending. Okay. And there is an equitable estate, not only on an individual or a family level, but basically on a planetary level. Okay. And we are in a moment of time in history and in this world where it's about to shift, where we are about to have, and it's not just through the work I'm doing or our society Panterra, but that's why our focus is, that's what Gemstone stands for, global educational media, that we're about to build a platform to expand our ability to put this education out there and guide people to really start breaking down the programming and unleashing or releasing their conscious awareness of what's really gone on here. Because in the global level of things, there's an equitable estate that we all must start reclaiming individually and collectively. And by the principles of universal law, the entire equity of this world belongs to those who created it, not the parasites who use essentially smoke and mirrors to create contractual points of attachment to the people and the beings who actually created it and set it up that the parasite looks like the superior master when in fact they're just a parasite. And the nature of a parasite is they don't create. They don't know how to create, but they know how to mimic creation. And this goes back to lots of multi-dimensional levels of the conversation, but they are mimics. Right. They don't know how to create because they disconnected from their own capacity to do so, or source or creation, however you want to define it.
Have they got away with all this? Because we're all mimics, Ken.
Well, it depends how you mean that. What do you mean we're all mimics?
Well, we all, monkey see, monkey do. We do actually learn from each other, and we learn from the world around us, and we learn, like I'm learning from you, of course, and I hope my listeners are too.
Yeah.
We are all mimics. I will, if I see you succeeding and, removing those binds that stick us into the realm of the dead, as they say, I would want to copy that. I would want to know that and have that knowledge. And if I don't know it, I'm going to have to glean it off somewhere else. So we're all mimicking each other, aren't we?
Well, you could say that, but that's not how I'm referring to it. In that example that you gave, what I do with our members who are part of our society and going through the educational process, there's a difference between programmed behavior versus innate expression of creative intelligence. We'll call it that. And what I say to everybody who comes into our society and goes through our educational process is you have to make it your own. You can mimic me in effect to look at how I can use language, and I've integrated this knowledge into a level of comprehensive understanding and all of that. But if you don't own it and make it your own and truly integrate it, then
that makes sense.
You don't have the internal power and authority of that. And yes, we are all mimicking it to return to standing in that sovereign integrity where we are attuned to our being, our true internal sovereign integrity. And at a certain point, it will shift out of pre-programmed behavior into directive intention and expression and manifestation. And that's the difference between mimicking and creative intention.
Right.
And yes, you could say nothing is new under the sun, and therefore nobody is creating anything new. Well, that's part of the program reality. Yeah. But also that's ultimately not true either. Yeah. We are going to create, as far as I'm concerned, where I'm standing, where I'm looking forward, we are going to create an entirely new world here. And we are going to crack the shell of the holographic false reality that appears to be real, appears to have the power, appears to have the authority and control over us. And all that they really did is they constructed this vast, complex structure of history and law and legal systems and monetary construction to get us to voluntarily agree to attach ourselves. And with that attachment, when you really break through and you get it, you get this quantum awareness and knowing of what I'm talking about, you suddenly see how the whole thing is a false reality. It's a projection. It entrains us to become biocrystalline virtual reality projection units, and it has entrained us as a collective body to project that reality creation into this false hologram based on a basic principle, which is lack and limitation, fear and survival. Well, that's what we grew up with. There is a lack. We don't have enough. We don't have enough water. We don't have enough energy. We don't have enough food, all these things. That creates limitation. Well, I can't go do this because I don't have the money or the resources to go do what I would really like to do. So there's lack and limitation. What does that engender? Fear. Fear of what? Fear of someone or something outside of myself coming and taking what I do have away from me. And then that turns us into survival mechanisms. And we operate on the pre-programming that is both ancestral in our DNA as well as social, familial, indoctrination, school and media and all the rest of it, until we just grow up to become good, cooperating civil body citizens. But when you break it down and you actually see it, ultimately what you see is we have a life force. Those beings who are still alive, because there's a lot of humans on this planet who are pretty much dead. It's the night of the living dead. They're walking, talking, but they are hardwired to something that they attach themselves and agreed to be part of a long time ago, and to be fully cooperative, hive mind Borg units or cells that are attached to a false reality AI God system, and they adhere to it and they get their little benefits and privileges, but they're effectively dead.
Makes
But
sense.
where we are in time and history is we're facing a fundamental choice, a choice of life or a choice of death. If you choose life right now, you commit yourself to a path of transformation, you will draw to yourself the pieces of the puzzle, the knowledge and the guidance to start integrating that. And it can be mimicry for a while, maybe a long while, but you start suddenly removing all of those false overlays, the holographic inserts, the programs, the mind control, and so forth. And as you do that, your landed estate, which is the living flesh of your body, your cellular structure, your DNA, and so forth, starts embodying more of who you really are. It starts pushing out that which you are not, and you start gaining more capacity, more awareness. And as we do that individually, the collective whole is doing it at a quantum exponential scale now, and it's rapidly breaking apart the old false reality. And so it's moving out of mimicry into living, standing capacity to create. And as we redirect that biocrystalline virtual reality projection unit into continuing to agree and consent to create the false reality of death and destruction, then we can redirect it into not lack and limitation, fear and survival, but a reality that is vibrant and alive and abundant and prosperous, and every living being is fully standing in sovereign integrity, and all life force is honored by all living beings. And in that reality, there is an unlimited level of equity, if you will, living creation that we have and receive everything we need to create. And as we create more. We come together with more creator beings who are co-creating together. And as we move into that, we are creating a new reality. That new reality is life. If somebody is just, no, I'm afraid, I don't want to do that, I'm going to go back to sleep. Well, some of those will wake up later once they really see it and say, well, that looks like a whole lot more fun over there than here. I'm going to start waking up, figure out how to get there. But there's a lot of beings, human beings, who have already chosen irrevocably, I'm going the path of death. Right. And that's the transhumanistic merger of this artificial intelligence, hive mind, Borg consciousness that people call the singularity of the final fusion of man and machine into this super being of incredible intelligence and capacity merged with computers and so forth. But that whole computer AI intelligence, artificial intelligence system is based on one thing, which is a binary code. And that creates a split reality as the filter through which we perceive reality and create reality. And it's always in polarity. So when we're in polarity, we're constantly seeing things outside of ourselves as either, they're either for us or against us. It's either friend or foe. Right. But there's always a foe. There's always an enemy. And that's how we're controlled. But you can see that false system breaking down now. People are waking up and saying that, hey, no, there's not this eternal war with Russia as the evil empire that's just going to last forever because George Bush told us that's the way it is, or Obama or Clinton or whoever. And for all his flaws and foibles and failings, Donald Trump is establishing a basis of peace. Well, then it's up to us the real creators of this reality to take it up, to return to that sovereign integrity and the creational capacity that is inherently ours, and really create the world. Donald Trump is not going to create it, but he is breaking apart the stranglehold on the monetary system, the military, and the eternal perpetual war that was the end point of their whole game.
Certainly was, yeah. So what do you say to people, Ken, who look at you and listen to the last two interviews, maybe looked at Gemstone University website, haven't gone any further than that, but come back to me with really negative stuff? Now, I've had positive and negative, just to let my listeners know, but I have had people. What do you say to people who say, Kenneth Cousens, he's just running a cult? It's a scam. Mm-hmm. He's making loads of money from this. He's getting rich while everyone else pays him. I've had quite a few people saying various things like that. It's a religion, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's not surprising. And I don't know if those comments came mostly from the United States or worldwide. I would guess most of them came from the U.S. And yeah, I've progressively become more known out there in that field, which we call the law movement, sovereignty movement, and so forth. And I'm quite aware of people who hold that point of view, and I will definitely tell you that they don't have hardly any of the facts. All they're looking at, and they're looking at it through their own filter, which is what I just described.
Yes.
The binary mind that only sees either good or bad, friend or foe, and so forth. It's what I coined the phrase 20 years or so ago, the enemy construct.
Right.
And see, when we go through the law movement, or restate that, when I've gone through the law movement now, pretty much 30 years. I basically started, wiggling my first toe into it in 1989, 1990. So it's pretty much 30 years. I really started when I started meeting the first couple of people that I started learning from in 91. But let's just say during the course of the 90s, I was with and learning with and hanging out with the pioneers of this whole movement, and some of the grandfathers and grandmothers from the 70s and 80s. There's one characteristic that almost universally they all had, which I eventually called the enemy construct. They went into this whole mindset that the church was the enemy, the queen was the enemy, the state, the U.S., the military, the bankers. Every building block of that system was the enemy. What they didn't understand is by being stuck in the enemy construct, in that binary mind, they were already lost. And then that proved out for almost all of them. Almost all of the major ones that I hung out and learned a lot from, they all went to jail and prison. And, and there's a lot of people that, I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of people in the law movement know all of those well-known names who taught commerce and things called the secured party creditor process and so forth. But they were all in a field of battle because that commercial civil body, military occupation, jurisdiction in bankruptcy, and the licensing for a living being to voluntarily contract to be able to operate within that domestic commercial zone enabled us to originate public instruments called money, Federal Reserve notes, and so forth, and become the debtor, the bonded surety to the monetized debt. And we were operating under license, and there were hidden and deeply embedded contracts that nobody really addressed. There was a book that came out in the 1980s, I think, or maybe the 90s, by a man named George Mercier, Mercier, called Hidden Contracts, which is readily available on the internet in a PDF. Used to be very hard to find, but now you can just search his name, search the title, you'll find it. And he talked about hidden contracts. If you went into court and you said, well, I'm a sovereign and I've, rebutted your presumptions and I've severed the contracts and blah, blah, blah. Well, the judge was looking under his bench or his desk and looking at, and he wouldn't say it. He's taking what's called silent judicial notice. And he's looking at this, notice that, I see you have a bank account. Well, that's a benefit and a privilege that you accepted to create commercial paper, monetized debt in the franchise name or a corporate name with your signature on it. And therefore, you're attached to it. And that's a hidden contract. And then people got wise to that and they stopped using, checking accounts and things like that. But it goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But as it related to the enemy construct, virtually 99% of the people pursuing freedom didn't understand that they were still in a polarized reality, operating within their thinking level of things and emotional and really physical in a binary construct of a polarized reality that was still seeing an enemy outside of them. Okay, so you started in the beginning when I mentioned we were talking about equity, and you said, "Well, isn't it fraud? Haven't they bamboozled us or baited and switched things?" Well, from there, we're talking about the controllers, creators of the system. From their point of view, it is all disclosed. That's why, and they operate on a fundamental of the esoteric model because that's how they're trained, and that's where the bloodlines and secret societies have been training their people and their generations for thousands of years how to understand all of this and to stand above that binary construct and control both sides, which is why the Masonic floor, why Westminster Abbey has a checkerboard floor, dark and light. They don't ascribe to one side or the other. They control both from above, and that's how they're trained. And so they're controlling the enemy construct and the consciousness that has been programmed in the binary mind. And so, and in that esoteric the fundamental of the esoteric system is it all must be hidden in plain sight. Yes. There's where the phrase having eyes to see comes in. If you don't see it, it's hidden. It's in plain sight, and it's everywhere. So the decoder capacity of seeing the symbolism and the hidden constructs and everything, whether it's in the legal and monetary system, the religious system, or, everything, the corporate branding, logos, the TV, it's all there. Of course, now it's coming more and more. They're just putting it in everybody's face and presuming the mass of the population is still entrained and mind-controlled and will go along with it readily and happily. But the point is, as it relates to the legal system and the monetary system, it is, from their point of view, it is all disclosed. And the fact is, it's all public record. Yeah. But see, it's so fragmented that if you don't have a decoder ring or a capacity to see multidimensionally and take those fragments that are hidden through time and space and integrate it, which means you must integrate it internally within your being to see the mirror reflection, because the inner technology of who we are as living beings is vastly more it's vaster by magnitudes of scale than any externalized technology, whether that's Babylonian money magic technology or computer technology or all these things that seem to be so fascinating. Mm-hmm. It's all mirroring our internal capacity, our spiritual technology. And so what has been done is it's all hidden in plain sight. It is all disclosed. But we have been programmed. We have been having our minds fragmented. It's what I call the MTV mind construct. MTV came out, 30 or so years ago, and that generation of young people and teenagers just got fascinated with watching music videos. Well, what it was doing was breaking the whole mind down into fragmentation. so that, it's the MTV moment, 2 or 3 second flashes of something. Your mind wants to grab it and understand it, integrate it, but it goes too fast. So it's fragmenting the mind, and so people can't think. They can only conform. They can only follow the rules and do what they're told as good citizens that are bound and bonded to the public civil coded system that says you must do this, this, and this, and you must file your taxes and report this and do that. And you'll be a good little boy or girl, and then you get to retire, and you get to die of your appointed disease when the time that's pre-appointed for you to do so arrives. As it relates to your comment, well, isn't it fraud? Well, when you polarize with the system and say it's fraudulent, it defrauded us, it baited and switched us, that what that really does is it disempowers you. Because if you take the position that I am the creator, I am the biocrystalline virtual reality projecting unit that allowed my creator capacity, my sovereign integrity to be entrained to be part of this hive mind creation. And that I allowed my life force to contribute to the creation of this false reality hologram. If you take that position, it re-empowers you. I created this, therefore I can uncreate it. I can work with a collective body of truly growing into greater levels of awareness and consciousness. We could come together not as a cult, not as a controlled hierarchical system that people are projecting onto me as if I'm doing that, because I'm not. We'll get back to that in a moment. Right. But we are emerging back into taking control of our living capacity, our life force, and all the rest of it. And, it's kind of like this. You got two big, carved out holes where water flows into one, and it fills it up and it creates this lake. You divert a river and you want a lake over here. So you divert it, you dam it, and there you have that water. But somebody owns the lake because you agreed to a contract to be attached to the rules of that lake. So the water flows into it, but the owner, by contract, gets to use the water, grow what he wants with it, and sell it back to you at inflated prices. But it was your water in the first place, and you just contracted it away. Well, if you withdraw from that, you rescind the signature to the contract, and you redirect that energy or that water flow, that current, into where you want to fill the water and nourish the land and grow the food and all the rest of it. Now you are redirecting your creator capacity, your life force, into a reality that you want. So it's a matter of choose what you want to create. So along with the enemy construct, the next phrase is there are no enemies, there are only opportunities. If you come up to something that you have a resistance to, that you're polarized with, because what I would say, those people who see me as a cult leader or saying a religion, or I'm creating all this wealth and I'm creating minions and slaves who just, do what I say, that's because it's the reality they're living in. And whether it's me that they're projecting that enemy construct on, or the government or the bank or the Pope, it doesn't matter. They're still caught in a binary mind and a controlled reality that they think they're thinking their own thoughts, but they're not. They're seeing me through the filter of what already controls them. But there's an opportunity there. If they would stop seeing me as the enemy, or people studying law stop seeing the system as defrauding and it cheated us, or it, all those things that people say, and start waking up and learning what you need to learn and integrating into your being, the more you remove of that attachment and those overlays and those control mechanisms and mind control and programming, the more of who you really are comes into your body. And the more you can direct that to the other lake and sever the contracts that going into the other guy's lake that he owns and controls, and you start nourishing your own fields and growing your own reality. So if you take the position that there's an enemy, you're already lost, you're already controlled. If you take the position that there are no enemies, but an opportunity, so that the opportunity is when you see an enemy, it's an opportunity to go inside and reflect, well, what is it inside me that I've accepted and allowed, that I've programmed myself to be in a binary polarized reality, that I see enemies.
Yes. Yeah.
Then the next level is a phrase that I coined a long time ago, 20 years ago. That which is broken cannot never be fixed. That which is real can never be broken. So the real reality, the real creation never went away. It never was broken. They just created a mirror image of it that was externalized from the inner creational field that we are, equal to, we're part of. And we got entrained, went into amnesia, we fell into this sleep that we think that's the reality out there. So what is real never was broken, doesn't have to be fixed, because the false reality is built on the principle of everything's broken. The system's broken. The child protective services that took that woman's baby, that's broken. It can't be fixed. Et cetera, the legal system, everything. So what's real can never be broken. Right. Focus on what's real and the rest will fade away. Okay. People in the enemy polarized binary code, mind-controlled reality are focusing on what's broken. They're arguing with it. They're arguing with their own limitations. And when you talk to people, often why don't you do this and this? Well, I can't. And they argue for their limitations rather than saying, oh, I see my limitations. Here's the opportunity for me to do the inner work, to release myself from them so I can expand and do more, and I can create more and benefit from it in my life while contributing to a better life for everybody.
That's a brilliant answer, Ken. Kenneth is really, really good. I had written down, how does the reality of the world system affect the Panterra society?
Come to me with that with a different angle. What do you mean? Okay. How does the world system affect
the reality that exists out there? That we spoke of. So I suppose the mirror image of the pure reality that we should be living.
Right. Okay.
How is that affecting the society in general?
Right. Well, based on everything that I've talked about so far in this conversation, which I've done most of the talking.
Yeah. And so you should.
Well, that's fine. I'll accept that. Start. It's another variation of what I've been saying.
It is. I mean, you've pretty much answered it. Is what I was going to say.
And I have, but let me approach it from a different angle. So, there is an original creational field template for this planet, for this solar system, for the galaxy it's in, the universe it's in, and all the multiverse creation that we are in. Okay. Creation is an unending continuum. It didn't start here on this planet. It's not going to end here on this planet. But we have been, it's kind of like a river that gets its flow is diminished to a point where it stagnates, or the current that should be flowing freely gets more and more limited and controlled, and it starts going into these vortexes of eddies, little side coves or whatever, where the water goes in a vortex. Okay. And we appear to be in a never-ending vortex, that the flow of creation that we're part of coming through us and going through us into the never-ending future of just more and more creation, we seem to be stuck, and we have been. We've been stuck here for millions of years. The beings, the individuals who are listening to us, for the most part, are those who are waking up. That's why they're attracted to you and the shows you've done for years, and the people get attracted to me and Panterra and so forth. And we're starting to break apart that apparent unending vortexual black hole that we are lost in. And for the most part, we purposefully came here to break it up. So those who have woken up first and waking up now, consider that you are part of the planetary system busting team to break the stranglehold of creation and the attempt to own what is uniquely extraordinary about this living creational field that we call Earth, and what its destiny really is about. So take all that and say there's an original template.
Right. And
since we live in a sovereign free will universe, which is a creational field that at some point emerged out of source to create a new expression of how we as a collective whole of creation itself decided, okay, we're going to create a new universe, and we're going to create it on a universal principle that hasn't existed in individuated form, meaning individual living beings with complete and absolute sovereign free will. Let's see what happens. Well, here's the result. What happened was some beings at some point said to themselves, I have absolute free will. That means Johnny has that brand new truck he got for Christmas, whether Johnny is your brother or, the kid across the street. I'm going to go whack Johnny on the side of the head and take it because I have free will and I can do that. Right? Well, ultimately, that does not honor the life force that we call Johnny, because Johnny has the equitable interest in that new toy that came to him by the gift from his parents, say, or whatever, if he grows up and he exerts his life force to create it. And, he grows up, he buys a big truck, and some thieves take it and take it across the border here in California to Mexico, and they part it out, never to be seen again. Well, they've just broken universal law by stealing the equity of Johnny's truck, whether the little kid across the street or, later on some thief who takes it like that. That's transgressing universal law and the equitable interests and the rights that Johnny has inherent in what he created. That gets us back to what is equity. Yes. So that's what we're returning to. And returning to that ultimately is returning to balance, where every being is whole within themselves, standing as sovereign integrity, directing themselves by directive principle, which is will. That is what we could also call the masculine principle. The masculine principle is a directive principle. It is our will.
Right.
And we have been trained through religion and social indoctrination to abandon our will, to basically give our will to someone else. We were trained to give it to our parents, and then our teachers, and then our bosses, and the government, and the church. And the church has this thing called it is my will that thy will be done. And when some of your writers say, well, Ken is just building a new religion. No, I am breaking the bonds of religion, because religion comes from the Latin religere, which means to bond again. Yes. And so the whole monetary system is built on canon law and ecclesiastical law, and creates one fundamental, which is that we voluntarily attach ourselves as a bondservant by indenturing our life force in order for the monetary system to then take it, or the bankers to do what's called hypothecation, which is projecting our capacity to create 10 or 20 or 30 years into the future, adding debt and interest to it, or its debt itself, and adding interest and wrapping it, and then bringing it back to the present and monetizing it and bonding us as the surety, the guarantor, to service that debt. So for that house that I talked about an hour ago that I built, but I had to go to the bank to get their monetized debt so I could buy the sticks and bricks and so forth. I've just projected myself into the future by binding myself to a pledge of death called a mortgage, or a mortgage, which means pledge of death. And so I'm already in the realm of death. I'm going to work 30 years to pay off this debt that's going to end up 3 times that. And, you know, and then the bank is on the private side going to work in the system hidden from me and, you know, build private equity like what we talked about earlier. So that being said, back to your question, that there's an original template. And within the sovereign free will reality, it started with, you know, somebody saying, Johnny's got a truck. I'm going to go take it and whack him on the head. Well, that to me is the beginning point, millions and maybe billions of years ago, in this experiment called a sovereign free will universe. Nice. Well, in sovereign free will, I can do whatever I want, even if I whack somebody on the head and take what their equitable rights and interests are to be my own. And then that just increased and increased until more and more self-interest, self-focused, self-absorbed beings running off with sovereign free will came together and said, hey, well, you know, what did you do when you were young? Well, I whacked Johnny on the head and I took his truck. Well, now we can come together as a group, whether it's a gang or an army or a, you know, intergalactic space force of violence and war and destruction, and we could take over whole planets and whole solar systems and galaxies because it's sovereign free will. Hey, isn't that great? Well, look at this place called Earth. It's this most extraordinary birthing body of life creation where DNA is birthed at a diversity never before expressed at the level and degree of what this planet is. And a being accrues wisdom or experience through their larger capacity as what we call DNA or genetics in a multidimensional sense. And we go from planet to celestial body to solar system, and we accrue the wisdom of our being. And it is in a form, multidimensionally speaking, that we could call, in our limited language, DNA. Okay? So this planet was created or birthed itself to be a DNA birthing creational zone that was then going to literally go forth and birth new worlds or seed existing worlds or take a raw template of a creational field of a celestial body, whether planetary or larger, and seed it with the diversity of life that exists here that continues to emerge. You know, if you think about it, people talk about the science of planetary extinction events, you know, and supposedly we're in one now. Well, if 64 million years ago there was a planetary extinction event, and there's been several since then, as early as 10,000 years ago, how did it all come back? Where did it come from? Okay, you know, how does this planet keep regenerating itself? Well, that's the feminine principle, regeneration. Yeah. Well, in the binary split reality we're in, we've been split into separated binary, you know, polarized reality or perception of reality where there's a masculine or a male and a female. Well, you look at the transhumanistic transgender fusion into that singularity that they want to bring it to of merging man and machine. What are they trying to push right now? There is no male or female. There is no distinction of gender. Yes. We can just cross over as we wish. Well, we internally have the masculine principle, which is directive will. We have the feminine principle, which is regenerative capacity.
Yes.
And when we're not stuck in a zone of death, we are eternally alive. We can eternally create, and so forth. So back to our storyline of the free will zone and these beings who came together and created war and violence. Well, they wanted to control this reality, but in this creational field or zone, by the time they got here, they were so disconnected from their own capacity to create. All they could do with their AI binary code computerized God that they had created and became one with and operated in an externalized technology, all they could do was mimic the internal technology of our capacity as creational beings. So there's the original template, then there is the mirroring of it. So everything that we have mirrored in external technology, whether it's the legal monetary system or physical, electronic technology or nuclear technology, it's just a mimicry of a mirroring of who we really are and what we're actually capable of doing.
Yes.
Now, how do we use that? Because we're so far into it. Well, what we're doing is we're mirroring the mirroring. So this gets to your question. How does the world system relate to what Panterra is doing or what we're building a knowledge and understanding base to communicate through the education and the media that we're building and developing? It's because if you stop seeing the world as a projection of a polarity and an enemy construct and understand that the split of reality is internal, and you start healing that, you start healing the binary mind. So the directive will that we actually have, the masculine principle of directive capacity or will, has been replaced by a hive mind system in which the mind, the true mind, has been replaced with a mental construct that is polarized. It's all binary.
Yes.
And then they're trying to merge our true consciousness with a false consciousness in a controlled mind control reality in a computerized binary fusion of this singularity of there are no genders, there is no separation between man and machine really means AI, computerized, Internet of Things and all the rest of that. They are in training the mass population to agree to infuse themselves into that and go into this singularity that then becomes the Tron world and the where there's no difference between a video game and the reality you're living in.
Yes.
Well, people can choose that, but when they do that, they are choosing death. They are going into the death and destruction reality that does not honor life, does not honor the life force or the equitable interests and beneficial rights of he who to whom or she to whom creation belongs when one is the source point of one's creation. And so we are returning to that. Some are choosing not to return to that. And that phrase, the meek shall inherit to the earth, it's more correct to say those who have passively allowed themselves by voluntary consent to be attached to this holographic false reality are waking up and reclaiming their living estate, which is their living body and the land of this creational field that we call Earth and its life-creating capacity that we are learning the wisdom of. And we're returning to the land, reclaiming the land, connecting to our original harmonic resonance with the earth itself, recontracting with the earth rather than the false civil body system that lifts us off the land and we relinquish law and equity. We are returning to the land by severing those attachments, removing the presumption of consent and closing the contracts, reclaiming our estates, reclaiming the equity of everything that has ever been created by living beings in this world. And that's what it means for the meek to inherit the earth.
Yeah, okay. I was listening to that all the way through and thinking how positive you sound, Ken, and how wonderful our future will be if we all just head down this path and realise the lies we've been told. But how do we change things if the masses still seem to be playing their game? It does seem to be that we're in the minority. Am I wrong there? Is it a spiritual movement that I'm not seeing?
Hold that thought for 1 second. I got to send somebody a text real quick.
Okay, fair enough.
I will call you back in 15 minutes. Okay. An important call that came in. I had to tell them to call back. So
I understand. So what I was saying was, how do we change things if the masses still play their game?
Yeah. So you had said we want to keep this a little shorter. So how much time do we have left?
We have another 20 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, this goes back to the fundamental principle that everything we've talked about sits upon, which is that within the sovereign integrity of a whole system, which is a living being as a whole, that in and of itself, him or her, in defined sort of gender bodies at this point, is a creational field. We're here on this planet, to break apart this parasitic system.
Yes.
That only knows mimicry, and there's a difference between a learning process to learn something and then integrate it and own it. That's not mimicry, really. That's learning. That's, growing within oneself and taking directive capacity to learn something, to break out of this programmed reality. The parasite that I described has 4 primary functions or fundamentals that you can readily see. It's mimicry. It's a parasite. It can't create. It can only mimic creation because it's cut itself off from creation. It is a pathological liar, it or them or he or she. Look at what's going on in the United States and the attempt to break down the Trump administration, what it's doing to break down the deep state and so forth, and return this world to the potential of creating peace in the world. The Pelosi and Schumer and Schiff and Nadler and so forth and the Clintons, they're pathological liars. They're so pathological that they don't even know anymore that they're lying. That's why they can just stare directly into a camera and spew off what they say with impunity without any sense of well, I think they do know it at some level, but they're so far beyond it that they're just pathological. They're sociopaths. Everything living or dead to them is just an object that they use for their self-interest and their self-aggrandizement, self-benefit, without any sense of other. So the parasite and those humans who have allowed themselves to contract to be hardwired because they were promised benefits, that they're whining and complaining as little children because they're not getting it. But they're mimics, they're pathological liars. They deny their lying and their mimicry and what they do, and they project. So look at everything that the deep state is doing. They're projecting it all. Trump did this, Trump did that, when it's everything that they did. And they deny it. They deny it to the nth degree. They're pathological in their denial and their lying. And at this point, they do nothing. That's why Trump keeps saying these do nothing Democrats and so forth. But it's not just the Democrats. You take away the front persona, if you will, the mask of whatever it is, whether it's political or a politician or it's a monetary or banker or whatever, it's in every walk of life. So it's a principle or it's a principality that has had power by the mimicry and the false entrainment of life itself to control the life force, to create with it or get the creational beings to but it's falling apart now. And we are in a period now that we have two choices, like I said, life or death. Well, in life, one must face themselves. Well, you must face what you've created, the karma, the everything you've contracted with. So it's karmic resolution. When you do that, you can also resolve the monetary attachment, the debt. Because the vortex that I talked about is when you're recycled through reincarnation into a pre-programmed life existence, and then you're bonded in this modern system to monetize debt that attaches to you as the bonded surety. When you die, that debt is not resolved. Even for individuals who are supposedly rich, everything they sign their signature to created bonds and debt that are vast. Even if you pay off your mortgage and your car and all your credit cards and you have no debt, there's still vast amounts of bonded debt underneath every single thing that ever happened in your life. And when you die in the karmic system, in the reincarnational recycling system, they just translate your monetary debt to karmic debt. And then you're recycled into a new life, new body, and then you're rebonded into the monetary debt. And it's an endless cycle. Right. Well, we have to break that cycle. Mm-hmm. And that's karmic resolution. It's taking our power and authority, which is why we do not want to project an outside power. Oh, they committed fraud and I was a innocent victim. No, I take full responsibility for everything I created in this life and any other life, whether I'm aware of it or not. And I invoke the capacity and the power to resolve that, to call upon my equitable estate and resolve and settle and close all outstanding debts, attachments, liabilities, and so forth. And when I do that, that equity, debt, credit, debt, zero-sum game that I'm attached to begins to dissolve. And as it dissolves, my equity emerges and grows. That equity is my living field of capacity to create. Now I have more and more creational capacity to do what I said earlier, focus on what's real, and the rest will fade away. Well, if you really look at what's going on in the world, the false reality is fading away. It is breaking down.
Yes.
So, and there are things that I can't talk about yet, but we will over months to come.
Brilliant. Yeah.
That are actual, real, substantive solutions on a global scale that are being brought forward. And there is a long scale answer to your question, but the short version is simply this. We are in a holographic reality. Yep. It's a false reality. We have the ability, like that metaphor, to redirect the river so it doesn't go into their lake that they get to use to irrigate everything on the land, but we direct it into our lake, and we now have full contractual standing on the land and with the planet and with the life creational capacity of this living system. As we withdraw that, just look at that metaphor. The more the water flows, does not flow into the false reality, and it flows into the emerging real reality that never went away. It's just been obscured by our lack of capacity to see, because we've been entrained in our binary polarized mind that can't actually see what's really here. It doesn't mean that the trees and the flowers and everything we see is not real. No, it is real, but it's the perceptual framework and the overlay that we think is real, primarily based on the legal monetary bondage system.
Yes.
That's what's not real. That's what's fading away. That's what is a broken system that cannot be fixed. You look at politics, you look at every type of system, whether it's communism, democracy, fascism, whatever, its primary building block is a polarity. It's a duality. It's the dialectic.
Okay? And what a wonderful world we'd live in once that dialectic is gone.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So the primary esoteric dialectic is that there are two pillars that were created as the entrance to every temple. And there was an orientation to the sun as it rose on the horizon that was oriented based on the equinox and the solstice and where those two pillars would be placed. And then the hall that or the entryway leading into the temple, in which in the inner sanctum of that temple are the chambers in which the seed and the egg are deposited to create new beings. So when people bond themselves and bind themselves to religion, to bind again, and agree to be contractually attached to a false temple rather than the living temple of their body and the technology and the spiritual capacity that is inherently ours. And there's many religions. They don't have to be, Catholic or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or whatever. There's the religion. Ultimately, it's the religion of self, the religion of the false persona that we've agreed is who we are. And but those two pillars are aligned to the rising sun on the equinox, and the sun comes through there. And now the people become the seeds who walk through the two pillars and allow themselves to become the seeds of like a pod, like in the Matrix, a pod that will create and recreate according to the rules of the temple, which is ultimately the rules of the bank. Because in Rome, the banks were the temples, yes. And all the temples as banks were on a road called Janus, and Janus, Janus, was the Roman god of war. He's the two-faced god, and when the doors of the temple of Janus are open, it meant Rome was at war, and when the doors are closed, it meant Rome was at peace. So what happens every day from 8 or 9 to 5 or 6, at least here in the States? The doors of the temples, known as banks, open. That means Rome is at war with the people. It's a martial reality of a controlled martial warfare system, which commerce is a field of battle. And as long as you're arguing, you are attached to the martial reality and you have already lost. Mm-hmm. So when the doors to the temple close of Janus or the bank, Rome is at peace. And what do they do at night when the retail doors close? They trade all of the bonds and all of the deposed or deposited instruments of credit that they control because they belong to the state, and they trade and make all these bonds and multiplication of so-called money that they own and control and use to create their continuing warfare when the doors open the next day, to create all the black ops and the secret space programs and everything else that they're trying to create as their vast empire of eternal war. Mm-hmm. And that's why in 2003, basically in 2001, it started after 9/11. They declared a war on terror, right? Terror, but it's really a war on Terra, which is right in your neighborhood. Terra being the earth, Terra. Yes, that's why we call our society Panterra across the earth. So it's the martial reality of the parasite and the military occupier to create a global system of perpetual war, which keeps the United States and the Federal Reserve System in a state of perpetual war powers and emergency banking. And that's all vested in the administrator of the bankrupt estate, who holds the office of the president, to maintain, through executive orders and proclamations, a state of perpetual war. But this is what Trump is reversing. He's taking the position of holding the office, but he's not playing by their book. He's the trump card that's shifting it. So there's probably people listening who say, oh, now he's really off. He thinks Trump's a good guy. Well, he may have his faults and fallacies and so forth, but he is doing what's necessary to break the bonds of this perpetual war machine and system so that the people can then take their power back and start severing the contracts, claiming their estates, claiming their equity, and healing themselves, which is what we have to do to heal karma and resolve it. And if we don't take that conscious directive position, the other choice is death, and then karmic retribution or instant karma, as John Lennon sang about it, will hit you in the face. The manifested field in front of you in your life will start whacking you. And fortunately, those beings who thought they were, in control of this reality, karmic retribution, in other words, the bill is coming due, and suddenly karmic deference that was part of the false reality is no longer, and they're going to pay the bill. So we have a choice right now. Choose life, choose to face oneself, choose to resolve your karma, sever the contracts, return to wholeness, and use your creative capacity to create or recreate a living, vibrant system. But don't make the existing system your enemy, because the template of life was mirrored, but there are proper building blocks that we can rebuild the original system, in a sense rebuild the temple, but not like a physical temple of bricks and stones, but the temple of our living body, because we are the creation, and we have the authority and the power and the sovereign integrity when we re-embody, heal ourselves, and integrate it to create anything. Once we learn that, then that becomes part of our eternal being in the multidimensional DNA of the wisdom collected from all of our living experience, which is our equity of all the things we've ever created in billions of years since we emerged from source as an individuated expression of life with a unique frequency signature of who we actually are. And the knowledge, wisdom, and experience we've gained by going into the worst system of death and destruction and anti-life that's imaginable. Look around you. That's what it is. And we remember who we are, then we become seedlings, so to speak, of creators, and we can go into new creational fields and start creating new realities, new worlds. That's what's ahead of us. So the fundamental, to wrap it up, to finish it up, the fundamental esoteric system is those two pillars. And those two pillars are representative of the line of the priest and the line of the king. And the king, which is now expressed as the Crown Corporation in the City of London, is designed or set up to own all of the land. Lift all the living beings off the land, hold them in a containment field of the civitas, the civil body that is controlled by Admiralty Maritime bankrupt rules called civil procedure. And the crown owns all the land. And the Pope in 1302, through a papal bull, declared that, and succeeding ones declared that I, the Pope, the papacy, own all the land and all the flesh and all the souls in this world. So the Crown Corporation is set up to control all the land. And the line of the priest is the line of the law. But the legalized construct of everything I've described to bind the voluntary indentured servants who agree to indenture and attach themselves to the whole construct. And they must, if you're in a jurisdictional field, if you belong to and you're a citizen of this national corporation or this one or that one and so forth, you must follow its rules. And that's the line of the priest. That's the law of the temple. And you must follow it. Well, when you remove yourself from that, then the return to the land, and the first land is the landed estate of your living body. Now you own it. Now they do not own. Then you've rebutted their claim that they own your flesh and soul. Now you own it. You return to your wholeness, you stand in your sovereign integrity, and you return to the will of the directive principle of your will to direct creation as you wish to create, and you hold it in a feminine field of regenerative life the womb of your own capacity to create in co-creation with this planet. And now you merge those two pillars. You are the land, you are the law, the universal law and universal equity of everything we've described in this call now is individually expressed within you as a unique expression of life. And you co-create, come together and co-create with whomever you wish to and create. Now, what's going to mobilize that? There is going to emerge a new system that we are going to be able to build upon that has no monetary debt attachment and negative recourse. And so the people who project all of their negative constructs and fear onto me, as you got comments that Ken's trying to elevate himself as a god or a pope or a priest and blah, 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 and he's just gathering all this money and making himself wealthy. They're so absolutely wrong, and everything that I and we are doing is so much the opposite of that. Well, that's fine. I don't care what they think about me. All they're doing is projecting their own inner state of separation that they are accustomed to projecting onto some outside enemy. You know, now they've chosen me to be their enemy. Well, that's fine. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't impinge my sovereign integrity and my capacity to create.
Fantastic. And this time has obviously flown, and of course you'd be speaking more than I. You have the knowledge, Ken. The one thing I wanted to say to my listeners is I didn't just have negative stuff. I had very, very positive reaction too. I mean, I got one specifically all the way from Dubai, Persian lady, Shekova. She says, "You are the most intelligent and aware awakened man she has ever seen or heard on this planet," Ken. Which is a very nice compliment from Shaparak. And she also has a question which I know you won't be able to answer fully now, but I'll get the question out, and maybe like the equity being left mid-air, this question...
We'll go to the next one, yes.
Exactly.
It'll be the bridge to the next call, yeah.
Maybe so. So this is, now that we've found the real truth behind the convincing show, thanks to Ken, what do we do when a newborn baby arrives in this world? i.e. by not getting a birth certificate, and in later stages by not obtaining a passport and driving license. So how do we introduce ourselves to the world? How do we travel? And what would be our phantom self identity?
Yeah.
Massive, isn't it?
That's a very big question. Yes. So we're going to have to bridge it to the next show, but it's a perfect show to start with.
Indeed.
I mean, a perfect question to start the next show.
Indeed, and hopefully it'll be a little taster of what our listeners will get next time you're on the show. I do want to read a quote from your own gemstoneuniversity.org that just resonated so fully with myself. "All ties that bind must be removed in order to be free. This requires the rescission of signatures previously applied, the revocation of powers of attorney previously conveyed, and the termination of contracts previously engaged. In total, this constitutes the rescinding of the contractual agreements entered and maintained pursuant to the law of the contracts, all into which we have blindly strayed. We leave the realm of the dead and walk onto the land of the living, where we have standing, status, and capacity." And that is just
fabulous. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's it, because ultimately in a free will universe, law is fundamentally built on contract. Because if I'm standing as a true sovereign integral being and I have sovereign free will and you the same, the only way we come together is by mutual agreement with mutual benefit, and that's contract.
Right.
So,
well, we've contracted for the last three. This is the third contract we've established.
Right. Yeah, and but I'm speaking in a broad, generalized manner in terms of everybody. We are all truly sovereign free will beings, and we have entered into contract. So the entire world system is based on getting us. Yes, there is false misdirection in getting us to believe we have to enter those contracts. And once we are attached to those contracts, they now become virulent in terms of their methods to force us to comply to all the rules, which are codes and statutes that they call codes, but they're just, they call laws, but they're just legal codes in the codified system of the Code of Civil Procedure that attaches to bankrupt management or administration. So the key to her answer, and it relates to the woman who has her baby thus so far taken away from her, is that we as parents do not have lawful standing. We are legal guardians, because when a baby is born, the birth certificate system, which starts with a registration, and the word registration is based on regis, which is regal, which is the royal estate. We are declaring that the baby is a foundling, because the registration actually doesn't include both parents. Most of them that I'm aware of in the U.S. Is the mother is informing the declaration on the registration form to put the baby or the newborn technically as a foundling, because there's no father. Even though they name who the father is, there's no signature of the father. So the baby is severed from his patrimony or his ancestral lineage on the patrilineal line, which has got nothing to do with males or siring and all that. It's the directive principle. So we're severed from our will right from the beginning. So then the state acts upon the registration, with the mother acting as informant, as a foundling. This baby was found and hence abandoned, and I'm informing, aka the mother is the informant on this, and now I'm registering the baby, who becomes a ward of the state. And then a ward requires a guardian. So this is the guardian-ward relationship. So the state becomes the legal guardian and the executor of the estate, and all of the legal bureaucratic structures we're familiar with, from traffic court to tax systems to everything else, is basically the executor managing the abandoned estate, and the whole presumption that the original living beneficiary of the whole estate has been lost at sea. And so the parents then are, legally speaking, within the containment field of what I've described. They're legal guardians. So what happens when two parents die? They have to find a legal guardian. So a legal guardian is only a representative of the executor of the estate and the attached abandoned corpus or body of the estate, which is the living body of the baby. And because it all falls under public policy to the maintenance of the administration of bankruptcy, they must do what's best, quote unquote, for the public, which is to maintain the totality of the bankrupt estate.
Yes.
So this is why you have vast amounts of, because see, this estate that we're talking about is bankrupt and it's imploding. The original intent was they would collapse a bankrupt estate and reconstitute it into a basically an eternal and perpetual enslavement and bondage system. Yes. And that's a big subject we can't go into, but that's been breaking down and purposely been countered over the last 20 years. It was supposed to collapse completely in 1999 and into the year 2000. And then they would start their perpetual war on terror in 2001, which they did, but it's been broken up. And it's not going to complete that way. But each individual estate of each baby born turns the baby into a ward of the state, and the parents into legal guardians. And if the legal guardian, aka parent, does something to abrogate or in some way not follow the codes, the rules, then the state, through the mechanism of its bureaucracy, with, in this case, Child Protective Services, comes in and takes control of the corpus of the estate. for the protection of the baby, but really for the protection of the public good, which is really the bankrupt monetary system. So in the question of the lady from Dubai, what happens with new babies, and do we get a birth certificate? And it's really not a birth certificate. It's a record of live birth that gets registered and gets converted to a record of vital statistic into a calculated actuarial system that gets underwritten. Actuary statistics are what insurance is based on, and then we can't go into that now, but it's the entry of the system of vital records that goes from the county to the state to the national to the international to the IMF, and ultimately to the Vatican and the Holy See to hold as a collateralized estate of the land, the flesh, and the souls, to monetize into perpetual bonded debt. And and then the baby grows up. He or she wants to be a driver, go get a license to drive. And when you do that, you agree to be a driver in commerce. And the whole system is commercial in nature. And that's where the control system and the creation of monetized debt happens and all of that. And then you go from there and you get a corporate passport and you can travel and so forth. It's a very large answer, and it gets down to that don't rush out and do things prematurely. You'll put yourself in jeopardy. You could lose your baby like this mother did by doing things without the knowledge and the understanding and the integration of how to do that. So there's a lot of people who go on the internet and they look and they, I do this, this, and this, and then I can, declare this, and then my baby doesn't have to have a birth certificate and blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, Child Protective Services comes and takes the baby away, and you spend 10 years without your child fighting the system. That's not how you do it.
Nobody wants that, do they?
And it's not an overnight process. You must understand and educate. And based on that, over time, and based on new things that are about to emerge in this world, that we can have proper lawful travel documents that don't adhere to the corporate state or the monetized debt system. They are coming. They are going to be available. But it's a vast body of work that must be done, because we have to educate a lot of people to be able to truly understand how to do it and not do the stupid patriot sovereignty movement stuff that got lots of people thrown in prison and characterized as sovereign citizens and all the rest of that, which is another discussion. But the answer to the question is education first, coming together with other people to help each other educate and learn, and then building a basis of educated and informed beings who then can move forward with the proper tools and solutions to take the right steps when you're ready, not because you want it today or tomorrow, but when you are ready to properly do all the things that we're talking about. Everything that you just read in that quote about rescinding signatures, revoking powers of attorney, and ending contracts of engagement that we voluntarily agreed to attach ourselves and our children to be property or chattel property under the royal estate, under the Crown Corporation. We have to reverse engineer it. And there's a path and a way to do that. But the first step in doing that is education, because for the mother who just had her new baby taken away or any of the children that the woman in Dubai is referring to, they are only legal guardians. They are not lawful parents. And until you remove that overlay of legal guardianship and ward of the state status, you cannot do anything to change your life or the life of your children. So that's why we're doing these shows, so you can at least start with a framework of proper orientation. Remember, the word orient means the east, which means how they oriented those that entered to the temple. You walked through the two pillars of the king and the priest, and you became the seeds that implanted in their ovaries in the altar. And, what is the word altar in English? Well, it's supposedly a sacred place, but it's a place of sacrifice, and it's a place of alteration. You come in as a living being, and you become a seedling to place yourself as a seed to be altered into a transhumanistic seed of conscious creation that gets turned into an artificial binary code controlled mind that gets merged into a hive mind, into the Borg of Star Trek. That's not where we want to be. We want to remove ourselves from that tempo, from that bonded religion, and reconnect to our own temple, which is our living body, which is the foundation of our capacity to expand our awareness, to reconnect to universal creation.
Brilliant, Stefan. And we've got so many more shows, hopefully, in the pipeline, because there's an awful lot of material to cover. I mean, I want to know, how long is the list of signatures that we have to rescind? How long is the list of withdrawing consent, etc., etc.? So look, status correction as well. Really want to get into that. Kenneth Scott, thank you so much for coming on Out of the Bag this week. And hopefully it will be again next month rather. From the Panterra Private Contract Association, check out Gemstone University. I'll put all the links in the blog and the podcast page. And once again, Kenneth Scott, thank you so much for coming on Out of the Bag.
Okay, great.